Good evening, everyone. You're watching a special edition of Vintage Motocross Q&A. I'm your host, Joe Abadi, and it's a special edition because we have an interview tonight, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about my guest in just a moment. Right now, I want to thank our sponsors who help make this show possible. Motion Pro, Vinco, Racer X Magazine, Preston Petty Products, Full Circle Racing, Northwest Mako CZ, the International Motocross Museum, and Sunrise Vapor Blasting. And please don't forget, keep sharing the show, whether you're on Facebook or you're on YouTube. A little bit later on in the show, we will have a random share giveaway winner, and you'll get a sticker sheet just like this, compliments of Vinco. As I said just a moment ago, it is a special edition tonight where we will be doing an interview, and I'll tell you a little bit about my guest right now. My guest tonight was in the inaugural AMA 250cc National Championship back in 1972, where he finished a respectable third behind Gary Jones and Jimmy Weinert. He also won several prestigious races throughout Australia and New Zealand before coming to America, and with J.N. Roberts entered the Mint 400, which they actually won. He's also a winner of the National at Hangtown, and in 1971, he was the first winner of the Daytona Supercross. This was, of course, before it was called Supercross. And at the ceremony, when he was accepting his trophy, he thought that the stadium event was such a great thing that he said, who knows, someday it may be bigger than the Daytona 200. A lot of people got to laugh at that. But today, when we look back and we think about it, the Daytona Supercross is the granddaddy of all the Supercross races, and it is high on everyone's list. He's been an engineer for the Husqvarna factory. He's been a racer, the motocross team manager for Honda, as well as being an intricate part of the Honda Automotive Division. He was also the editor of Dirt Bike Magazine for several years. It is my pleasure tonight to have as my guest, Mr. Gunnar Lindstrom. Gunnar, are you with me?
Thank you, Joe, for that introduction. Yeah, it was kind of complete, wasn't it?
I tried my best, Gunnar. You know, you've had a long career, and I tried to get in as much as I could.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, you did good.
Thank you. Gunnar, a question that a lot of people ask me, including Paul Stannard from Preston Petty Products and a few other people, and I wanted to know this question too, and I've never, after all the times of speaking to you in the past, did you create the Gunnar Gasser? Was that your idea, that Whirlpool throttle?
It sure was. I took it from start to finish, so to speak, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that everybody else copied my product down the line. And, that's the biggest, compliment you can get when people start copying you. So, yes, I did. 1987 we started. I'm sorry, 1978 we started and, got it to the market in summer. Yep.
Now, they say on them made in Sweden. Were they made in Sweden partially, or where did that begin? Where were they made?
Partially, yes. The casting, the plastic parts, and most of the well, there weren't that many parts in the first place, but yes, they were. And screws and bolts and nuts and whatnot we bought locally here. They were all packaged here in my garage, as a matter of fact, with the help of my family for many years, and it was a great success.
Now, did you have any outside help with that? I think Paul Stannard said something about Joel Bulger, but I'm not too sure about that. But were there anybody else in the motorcycle industry that kind of helped move things along for you with that throttle?
Well, Joe, who was a good friend of mine and a great guy in general, he did not help with this, but there was actually Bob Fox was my final consultant when I presented a couple of different options to Bob, saying, what do you think, this one or this one or this one? We had three, I think. And he picked one, which is the one that I had picked also. So from then on, it was just full speed ahead.
Now, did you have a patent on that? Because so many people copied that Whirlpool-style throttle, and I'm wondering if you had a patent on it, or did you just let that go and people started making them?
Well, we considered that, and there was some cost involved, and it was at the beginning of the product too, when I had absolutely no money to get a patent for it. So we decided instead to tie up the entire distribution channel. We had Malcolm and Torsten Holman and Fox and whatnot. So I all the major distributors were exclusive to my product, and it took many years before any competitors came in, and so that's the way how we did it, by tying up the entire distribution system with my product.
Okay, well, You've answered a question that a lot of people had, and I'm glad I finally got to the bottom of it myself. Gunnar, you've been involved in the motorcycle industry from going way back to actually working at the Husqvarna factory in Sweden. But I wanted to know what was your first experience with motorcycling, and what got you so interested in motorcycling as a young man?
Well, I was a farm boy, and I grew up on the farm, and I was spending very little time. In fact, until I started first grade in school, I hadn't really spent much time in the city at all. So I was out there. But one day, I was actually on my way home on my bicycle. We had a 2 or 3 mile ride from school and home. One of the fellows that worked at the farm he had bought a motorcycle, and I was standing there in this uphill. We had an uphill up to the farm, and I was standing there all tired with my bicycle. Here comes this guy on a Royal Enfield 350, and I can hear him from long away. And I'm standing there, and he drives on by, obviously trying to impress me, which he did. And I'm looking at this thing, and I go, wow! And there was almost a little rooster tail from the rear wheel as he was driving up this hill. And from then on, I figured, this is something I want to get into. This is something.
How old were you when you saw that?
Probably I was 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Oh.
Now, Gunnar,
so that's what. Yeah.
Go on.
So that's where it started, and from then on, I really didn't, learn much other than hanging around some of the guys on the farm there with their bikes and whatnot. And then, of course, when you turn 15, you are allowed to have a moped. And my mother was kind enough to buy me a moped. I had some money, but not much. And so I had this, DKW moped. That's how it started all, and that's how I started riding and getting used to, being on 2 wheels and riding through difficult stuff. I mean, moped went everywhere with those things. Yeah.
You mentioned you were a farm boy. What kind of a farm did your family have?
All dairy, so everything was catered towards producing milk, and that was really the only income. I don't think the farm sold anything other than the dairy products. In other words, milk, which was at the time picked up every morning by a truck that came and picked up these, 50 liters, whatever that is, about as much you can carry, and they dropped off the cleaned vessels, and they picked up the ones that had milk in them, and that was a big event, of course. When the milk truck came, you want to stay there and stand there and look and see how they did it, loading it on and off, and you got to know the driver a little bit. I mean, it was all farm stuff, right?
And that's something you have to do twice a day, every day.
Well, it was every morning, yes.
Every morning. So you didn't have to milk who milked the cows at night? Somebody else milked them at night?
I wasn't involved in milking any cows, but hanging out. No, that was not my job at all. There was people that did that, that knew what they were doing. I was just a little kid. Yeah.
All right. You tried to get a job at the Husqvarna factory. I guess it was after high school?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and at that time I'd actually bought a bike, and I was actually racing motocross a little bit, and my mother eventually allowed me to do that, and of course my father had passed away when I was young, so I got to work after high school. When I graduated high school, I got to work as an apprentice in the bike shop in my town there, and the guy there, his name was Bengt Kling. And he became my first mentor. And he was the one that taught me how to handle tools, how even weld, and how to do all mechanical stuff. And I worked there for 2 years, I think it was. And it was very helpful. So once I got going a little bit and riding a bike, I went up to Husqvarna and I said, you know what? Don't you guys need any help? I'm a good mechanic, and I was a pretty decent rider at the time too. And they said, yeah. They said, we really only hire engineers here. We don't want any just mechanics. We need engineers. So at the time, I had just started to go to agricultural schools. I went to an ag college not far away, and I quit that and went right back to engineering school instead, and never looked back to the agricultural side. The farm and the ranch stuff was for other people to do.
How far was the Husqvarna factory from where you actually lived?
It's a 45-minute drive. So
it was a 45-minute drive.
A little bit less now. But once I got the job there, which is a story in itself, I actually moved there, and I lived, by renting a room from a family there. So I didn't have to drive 45 minutes back and forth, because at the time, and even more so now, cost of fuel is high, and you don't drive more than you really have to. So I rented a room there. Yeah.
So you went to college, got a degree, and went back to the factory?
Yeah, and that story in itself. So I thought in my innocence, I thought, wow, when I have an engineering degree, I'm going to be welcomed with open arms. So I ran over there with my engineering papers in hand, and I said, hello, here I am. I'm an engineer now. And they looked a little bit funny, and I said, yeah, maybe remember you, but that's about it. But they said, we do have a job here. We can put you to as a contracted person, not as an employee, and that is to ride the first motorcycle, the military motorcycle. We need to ride it 10 miles a day, actually 20 miles a day, 10 miles in the morning, 10 miles in the afternoon, just to do durability tests with it. So I was a test rider for the military motorcycle MC256A. And I rode it through the winter, in the snow and everything. And I had all the gear, and the seal skin gloves and all that stuff. So that was a great thing. And I actually got to do a lot of riding. People say, riding is so important, but you've got to be on a track. I don't think so. And any riding is good riding, even a bicycle. You exercise your balance and you exercise your ability to plan ahead, even if it's only
right.
a few feet as to where you want to go. So I thought that, almost 1 year through the winter of riding that military bike, 20 miles a day was actually quite useful. Yeah.
So, Gunnar, I've obviously never had anyone on my show, or never really spoke to anyone that worked at the Husqvarna factory. They were prominent also in making artillery. And even if a lot of people may not know this, the H is actually inside of a gun sight. A lot of people don't realize that's the end of a barrel is the gun sight. So I'm wondering, when you were working there with the motorcycle division, were they still making guns there? And how many people did they employ?
Well, that's a long story in itself. So it was started as a gun factory, because in 1682, I think it was, the King of Sweden decided that we are being threatened by our neighbors to the southwest, the Danes, and they're going to invade us. So he needed guns and weapons. So they made shotguns and what muskets and whatever you have, for defending.
Right.
And that of course carried on, and they had other products eventually as well. But the thing is that during the Second World War, they made rifles, they made shotguns, they made pistols, none artillery. I never heard about the artillery part, which to me is like big cannon stuff, right? So,
yeah. But
they had that, and then they actually started focusing on hunting, shotguns, for hunting, and they were very, very sophisticated, and engraving on the side of it was very, very high class, so they were very expensive. But then there was a civil war in Africa, in the country called Biafra, and they suddenly found that Husqvarna shotguns were used in the war by one of the fighting factions. And just to avoid any political turmoil, they decided at that point, 1970, to discontinue making shotguns and rifles. So that was the end of the shotgun period with Husqvarna.
Okay. We're going to take a little break, Gunnar. We're going to hear from our sponsor, Motion Pro. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you got involved in motocross after working at the factory.
Yep.
We'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, we're back from break. If you've just joined us, my guest tonight is Gunnar Lindstrom, and we're talking about his time in Sweden at the Husqvarna factory and so many other things. So, Gunnar, tell me this. you're working at the factory. How soon after did you begin racing motocross? You said you had entered some races when you were younger, but now that you're at the factory, where did you go from there? I mean, because you worked there, did you begin racing Husqvarna in motocross there in Sweden?
Well, I've been racing all along on the junior level at first, and eventually at what they call the expert level there. So that was sort of a side business to me working at the factory, first on the military bike, and eventually, I became the project manager for the Husqvarna front fork, which in itself is a long story, because we were buying first from Norton and eventually from Seriani, and deliveries were, erratic, just to be positive, to put it positively. They came when they wanted to, and we had bikes to sell. So, Ruben Hellman, the chief engineer, one day said, hey, we cannot put up with this. We got to make our own front fork. We cannot. We have to be in control. So they did, and I became the test guy and the build guy for the first Husqvarna front fork. And we put this thing together. And Åke Johnson was Husqvarna guy at the time, and and he was called in to be a test rider. And we went up to the track up behind Husqvarna there that we had, and we were riding. And I can assure you, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. We were just riding, and if it didn't bottom, we were happy when we came back. So, more spring, more thicker oil, and that thing, had we had a little bit of wherewithal, we would have studied other forks, and we would have done all kinds of work. But we had a fork, and it worked reasonably well, and then they started selling it, and that was my first engineering project.
Okay, so then we were talking about you racing. Now, was it something you did on the weekends when you weren't at the factory, and how far did you go, and how far did that racing take you while you were still at the factory? Because I know it brought you to America eventually, but how far did it take you around Sweden when you were racing?
Well, the year is now 67, and I was working at the factory, and they allowed me to ride on the weekends, and I rode during the week often too. I mean, the front fork was the first. Many other things followed after that, and we were test riding, and we were out, evaluating things, and then all of a sudden, so by now I'm an employee, and I'm working there as an engineer on various projects, and then at the time, and during the weekend, of course, you race, and occasionally I would race in Europe and go down there, take the ferry down to Germany and drive, but not much, primarily racing in Sweden. And then, you always, at the time, you had a manager that would arrange for your races. It was, everything you had to enter ahead of time. You had to send in a letter, and they would send a letter back saying you're accepted, your starting number will be 24 or whatever it is. And the starting number changed every week, and that's why you see so many number plates from Europe with poorly painted numbers, because that was an afterthought. Once you got to the race, if you happen to have a can of paint, you painted it on the number plate. So the manager I had wrote applications to various races in Europe and elsewhere. One day he came to me in the summer of 67 and said, you know what, do you want to go to New Zealand and Australia? And I said, I don't even know where that is, but I know it's far away. It's on the other side. He said, yeah, I've arranged for you to race in the winter in Australia and New Zealand. And I said, okay. And I said, I'll do that. And so everything was arranged. And Husqvarna gave me time off under the condition that I took a look and wrote back to the factory people about, would Australia and New Zealand be a future market? What could we do for selling bikes? What about selling sewing machines and white goods and other things there? Do we have the right people? So I was sort of sent there with Husqvarna's blessing that they didn't pay for I didn't have a salary at the time, but they paid for the bike and all the other expenses. And we sent a big crate of stuff down there on the boat, on the ship, that should have arrived at Adelaide in Australia by a certain date. It didn't. So when I got there, I had no bike. That was a long story in itself, and I spent there. And by the way, so I got there. This was the days when there was no security at the airport. Now people stood literally on the apron, as you exited the airplane, And there's
Sure.
the whole motor club of Adelaide is standing there and saying, "Hey, here we are, and come on." And so well, of course, the first thing you do when you're in Australia, you go to a pub and you drink beer. And that's where they took me, and I didn't drink much beer. But they said, tomorrow we're going to go and get some other guy. And he's coming from America, and his name is J.N. Roberts, and he's going to write this series with us. There were three of us from Europe. There was also a guy from Wales, I think it was John Lewis, who was really a great guy, but I've never heard from since. And so we went there and picked up J.N. Roberts, and then his bike came in, literally laying down on a pallet, like brand new Husqvarna 360. So the story was that originally Bud Eakins, the famous movie guy, was supposed to be writing. And of course, what's happened there, there was some movie project coming up. So at the last minute, Bud Eakins says, "Oh my gosh, I can't go. Who are we going to send?" So he goes down to Tracy's in Burbank, the Husqvarna dealer. And he says, "Tracy, who is the best guy on Husqvarna around here?" And he said, J.N. Roberts is. So he called him up and J.N., do you want to go to Australia? And he says, huh? And eventually he sends him down there, and he has no bike. So he sends a bike on a pallet, brand new bike on the 360 Husky on a pallet. So we took the bike, off the pallet and got it ready for him. And of course, since I was the Husqvarna guy with technical knowledge, I became sort of helping J.N. Roberts with his bike. And he, on the other hand, became my first mentor in the English language. So he taught me, how to speak proper English. I only had some school English at the time, and I learned so much from J.N. He was my mentor, So it was funny.
Now, it makes me think also that if you were at the factory in the mid-'60s like that, you must have run across Torsten Holman while you were there.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, I was a very junior guy at the time working there, but we worked together on a few projects. So that was my first. And of course, eventually Mikkola came in too. Him and Kalevi Vekkonen came, in a car with an empty trailer. They picked up two bikes, and they were on their way to Europe, and they didn't speak a whole lot of English, non-Swedish. So it was all, sign language for that. So that was the first time I met Mikkola, whom in the near term I probably became more of a friend with than Torsten. Torsten and my relationship developed later, and when we started working on the book and all. So even before that, but that's also a long story. But Mikkola and I spent a lot of time together, and we were testing, and he is the reason actually that I started the Gunnar Gasser in earnest. I thought about that for a long time, but he was the one that actually had. He was low-siding all the time, and he would falling down to the inside, and he would bend his throttle cable because they were in a big loop, around the front number plate. So his mechanic, Pelle Moss, whom I knew well, had a whole throttle with the cable and everything all prepared. So whenever Mikkola broke his throttle cable, he had a new setup to go right away. He didn't have to the whole throttle twist grip and the cable attached and everything. So he could change that in minutes. So I thought that we need to do something about this. There's room here for some inventions. So I started thinking about the Gunnar Gasser at that point, testing with Mikkola.
So tell me now, you're with J.N. Roberts in Australia, and he invited you to come to America to race the 400. And was that your first time coming to America?
It was, and we flew home via Hawaii, and we stopped in Hawaii for half a day to go to the beach just to say that we'd been there. And those were the days, like I said before, airlines were much more lax. You could change your schedule. You showed up with a ticket, paper ticket in hand, and you said, can I go here? Can I go there? And they would change the schedule for you. So we flew home, and I stayed with JN for almost a month, and we did a few desert races, including the Mint 400 in Vegas that we won. And that was an adventure in itself. Lots of fun things happened around that. But yeah.
I understand they paid you in cash.
They did, and we got $4,000 for that, and
wow.
We cashed in the check at the downstairs, in the casino, and then included with the entry fee was actually a room at the hotel. So J.N. and I shared a room up there, and we took the money up there. We spread all the money out in the hundreds and twenties on the bed, and we took a picture, which I still have, And we thought we were rich. Look at all this money we have, and we divided it in half, and he took his half, and I took my half, and still have the picture somewhere.
Well, that was quite a payday. I mean, $4,000, $2,000. That was pretty good, huh?
At the time, yeah, we thought we were rich.
Gunnar, a lot of people would never believe this, but you and I actually lived in New Jersey at the same time. When you came over to America for Husqvarna, where I was, of course, a little younger than you, but anyway, that's not important right now. Where in New Jersey did you wind up working for Husqvarna? Was that in Edison, New Jersey at that point?
No, it was actually 151 New World Way in Plainfield, in South Plainfield.
Plainfield, not too far. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, exit 8 or 12 from the turnpike out there. So,
from the turnpike,
yeah, exactly. So Husqvarna had an office in New York, in Manhattan, actually, in the Chrysler building, and I actually went there a couple of times. But when they started taking on motorcycles, which is a long story in itself, I keep threatening you with all these long stories.
That's okay.
Mr. Farnström, who was in charge of that, and he was importing sewing machines, under the name Viking. Viking sewing machines were sold in the U.S. and they were quite successful. And of course, they had the shotguns up until 1970. So they had an import office in New York, and so then Mr. Dye starts selling bikes, and he sold 2 bikes in '66 and 100 bikes in '67, I think it was. And he was sort of more into selling bikes, and he was not big on parts. And so sooner or later, these people that bought the Husqvarna needed parts, and they keep calling Edison. And Edison, of course, in his typical fashion, said, "Yeah, we're working on that. Just have patience. Parts will come." But they didn't. And then after a little while, people became desperate, and they found through the phone book that Husqvarna had an office in New York, and they kept calling Mr. Farnström, who was in charge of the office, and he said, we have this Husqvarna bike and we can't get any parts. And once a few people had called, Mr. Farnström has to go back to Sweden and say, I get these calls, and what are we going to do? Long story short here, eventually he became in charge of Husqvarna import to America, and of course with Edison, and eventually John Penton. And moved out into New Jersey thinking that was a better location. And he found a building out there right in the middle of a field of some sort. And right next to that was a little private airport with a runway where I rode bikes up and down, actually. It was a dirt runway. And it had been used apparently during the war or something, because it was not active at the time we were there. But yeah, fun stories about the Husqvarna New World Way.
How long did you live there in Plainfield?
I actually rented a room from a lady there, Mrs. Brewer, but I never really stayed there because we were always traveling and going somewhere else. So then in '71 I bought a motorhome, and I was one of the first, if not the first, to have a motorhome, and so I stayed in that. So that was just for a short time, but I traveled out in and out of New Jersey for 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. We are going to take another commercial break, Gunnar. When we come back, we're going to talk about how your motocross career took off here in America. And who are we going to hear from? Vinco. We'll be right back after we hear from Vinco.
Vinco, who already has a full line of vintage parts, now has air shocks that are an exact duplicate of the original air shocks so popular in the late 70s. So whether you're looking to build a full racer or museum showpiece, these shocks will give you that incredible 70s look and improve your bike's performance. These new air shocks are fully rebuildable with Vinco rebuild kits, and all shocks are hand assembled in the USA with all new components. Every component is brand new. Just like the originals, our air shocks are adjustable with 2 chambers, high and low pressure, giving you tremendous flexibility for settings of your bike suspension. The Vinco air shocks come fully assembled and ready for installation. Just add air or nitrogen. The kits include the manual and spacers. Visit Vinco.com to check out the air shocks and all that Vinco has to offer to help you get back on track and keep that ride going.
Okay, we are back with Gunnar Lindstrom. We're talking about his time here in America. And in 1971, Gunnar, you get a motorhome and you start traveling around racing, or are you promoting Husqvarna? Are you helping develop dealerships? What are you doing?
All of the above. So,
Okay.
the Mr. Function was kind enough to let me race on weekends, and because that was sort of my job to promote the product, to have service schools and dealers, and we even had a training camp at one time at Unadilla. So it was just about everything we had to do with motocross and motorcycles was there. So we were at Daytona in '70. And we're sitting outside the gate because at the time, they only had one tunnel. And there was this guy, his name was Scott. He was from Texas somewhere. He had a motorhome. It was a Winnebago with a W up front and the edgy design and all. And at the time, nobody had motorhomes. That was for retired people, as old people. But this guy, Scott, had one. And we're looking around and we're looking inside and we're saying, Scott, this looks pretty cool. I mean, look at that, the bedroom in here and, the toilet and everything. And he said, can we drive it? He said, oh, yeah. So we take it out and drive it on the Interstate 4 up there and come back. And we say, this is pretty cool. And next to me, there's Gary Bailey, and he's looking at this thing, too. And we're saying, there's something here we can do. And so Gary Bailey at the time had the world's longest trailer. He had a Bultaco that he had his Bultacos in it. It was so long that it actually, bent in the middle. So the lower part of the trailer was in a big bend, so he was so overloaded. And he said, you know what, I could use something to tow my trailer with, because he had a van at the time. So I bought a motorhome not long after that up in Cleveland next to Penton's headquarters. There was a dealer, and I bought one there. And not long after that, Gary bought his motorhome also. We were the first two to have motorhomes among the motocross folks. So that's all comes out of that guy Scott, whom I never met since, and I don't know who he is or was. But he's the one that turned us on to motorhomes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And let's talk. You just mentioned about Daytona. That's where you saw the motorhome at first. What was it like when you first saw the Daytona track? I mean, you had raced on many outdoor tracks before, but there was nothing on an infield like that you'd ever seen before. Was there, or was there?
But the whole thing was such of an off experience, because the first thing we heard, where we knew about the asphalt track and the banking, and at the time there, who was the guy in charge of Daytona? Still is I can't come up with a name, but he said, I'll take you around on the asphalt, So he drove me. He has an Audi at the time, which was very unusual then. He drove us around on the asphalt, and we thought, this is really cool. He said the motocross kind of, we raced in the infield. And Gary Bailey did the track, and he built a few small jumps and had a few corners. And we started on the grass, which at the time was not very green, but it was, because it had been dry, I guess, and a little bit dusty. But that was fun, and the whole thing was just an way experience. The Daytona, the tunnel, the field, all the garages there. Which is not the garages they have now, but they had some small garages. Right. They had a fuel station and all kinds of stuff. We were blown away. We'd never seen anything like that before. It was just out of this world. Yeah. And
you actually won that race.
I did, because I was probably the one there with the most experience. But yeah, I did. It was a fun thing. Of course, next year Gary built more of the track, and eventually, of course, they went entirely to the infield. But that's after I had left racing, and it came later on. So the experience I have there is a mixture of, infield and the apron, and crossing the asphalt a few times, and a few ditches dug by a backhoe under Gary Bailey's, direction. So, but great fun, great memories from Daytona, that's for sure.
In 1972, the AMA decided to create a national series. You were involved in that series along with Gary Jones, Jimmy Weinert, and so many others. What can you tell me about the first year of the 250 Nationals?
At the time, we didn't think of it as in a very serious way. It was just another race, and there was also some debate at the time whether I and some others, course makers came later, would qualify as Americans. We didn't have a U.S. passport. could we actually win the national championship or not? So there was a lot of debate about that, and we didn't take it that seriously. This is just what happened, and I don't think I did all the nationals that year. I did many of them, but there were other things that came in the way, and we were just having a good time racing in the weekends wherever we were asked to go, and then of course visiting dealers and traveling during the week and working for Husqvarna. So the whole thing wasn't the way it is today. Of course, it's serious business. It was not so in 70, 71, that's for sure.
Well, you were also involved in some other types of racing, including, I think it was International 6-Day Enduro and the Baja 500. Right. Tell us about the Baja 500 experience. Were you in that alone, or did you have a partner in that?
No, it was J.N. Roberts and I, and we were supposed to ride, half each, and I was supposed to ride the first part, and Malcolm was guiding us. He had a little more experience, so I was supposed to ride the first part, and we were supposed to switch off halfway. Forgot the name, Punta Prieta, I think it called, and but of course I had a flat tire pretty quickly. I tried to ride it on a flat tire, and of course the tire completely came apart. And eventually I had to park the bike and try to get a ride home. So, and I rode on with Malcolm Smith in one of his trucks there. He had some chase people. So we rode in a pickup truck. It was painful. But because I was so bumpy, the time there was no asphalt roads. It was all racetrack. You ran it backwards, and it was really bumpy and holes in it. So I would much rather have ridden a motorbike across it. But anyway, I did have a chance to start once more again, I think, with Jay, and we didn't finish that one either. So I've tried twice and never finished. Al Baker and I did the 500 in 75, which we won on a Bill Bell Honda 4-stroke 450 or something like that. So, but that's my only success in Mexico is the 500 in 75.
Right. Well, the company you so badly wanted to work for since you were a young man finally got a chance to go there. They sent you around the world. You were known for being with Husqvarna for so long. But in 1974, I think it was, you had a little creative difference with someone there, and you parted ways with Husky.
I did. It was December 13, 74. The background to the story is that in 72, we came out with a new engine and a new bike. And it was not as successful as we had hoped for. As a matter of fact, in many ways, it was almost a failure. And the sales, of course, dropped off pretty quickly. And I had all kinds of ideas what we should do, what shouldn't do, and what have you. And I had the technical side at Husqvarna with me. We worked very well. Ruben Hellman and others, the chief design guys, we had ideas. But there was one of the directors that I really didn't think that somebody coming home from America with ideas was the right mixture to put to the group. So he was very hesitant to add me to the team coming back home. And at the time, I was prepared to move back home. I'd been in America since 69, and this is now end of 74. So, and I remember our discussion real well. I could have been a little more assertive, I guess, and argued a little bit better, but I felt pretty much disappointed and deceived by his attitude. And I told him right then and there, if I don't have your confidence, I cannot continue working here. So he said, yeah, it's probably better that you leave. So I did. And moved back to America, right after the holidays in January.
Now, and what I think was a rather unusual move, you went to work for Dirt Bike Magazine as the editor?
Yep, I did. And
how did you get that job? And I mean, was Rick Simon there yet?
He had just left, so I was sort of maybe a replacement for Rick Simon. And
okay,
but George Wegner was there, and I'm not good with names here. But anyway, the idea was, of course, that I had talked to the magazines before, because we did a lot of testing with magazines when you work for Husqvarna, and yes. I got to know these people. And at the time, I felt that I needed to know more. I mean, everything I knew was about Husqvarna, and not more. And I needed to know a little bit more about the industry. I needed a little bit more on technology that other people are using. And I wanted to broaden my horizon a little bit and not be so narrow and only know one brand. And in addition to that, I wanted to write something in English. So I had sort of, I say, something to show that I could write in English, and then my language skills were decent at the time. And also I wanted to learn how to take pictures, because I was very poor, in pictures. I had just Instamatic, so I wanted to learn how to use that, and I could accomplish that with working for a magazine. Now, working for magazines, it won't make you rich, I've talked about this many times. I could only afford to be there for 2 years, and then I had to get a job that were paying a little more, and and it's the same for all these enthusiasts magazines. Whether you're talking about flying high or diving low or knitting and sewing or whatever the enthusiasts magazines are, there's always somebody that will take the job, for practically no money, just to be close to the industry, to ride the ladies' bikes or meet, all the right people. And
now, Gunnar, were you married? Were you married at that point with children?
Yes, I was. We had a son at the
okay.
time. Yep, exactly. So and that of course was another reason, because living, on the road in a motorhome at the time was not such an ideal situation for my son. So so we got a house, and the funny thing is, I got the job. We were on 16,200 Ventura Boulevard in Encino, which is in the valley here in California, and I figured, where would I want to live? And I said, going along the coast, I could go maybe 30 minutes would be the longest I would think of commuting. So I got in the car, I drove 30 minutes, and I pulled off, and I said, this just looks like a good place, and it happened to be Thousand Oaks. And I went to a realtor there, and he sold me a house, and that was pretty quickly. It happened, within days. So that's how we ended up in Thousand Oaks. I lived there. As a matter of fact, the house is still there now, and my son lives in it.
Oh, okay. And you live where now? You're you're in outside of Burbank somewhere?
Yes, I'm near Burbank Airport in a small place called Sun Valley, and we can see the airplanes come and go. We don't hear them very much, but it's close enough. And North Hollywood is close, and we're close to the strange behavior of the Hollywood people. So yeah, it's a good place to live. I like it. Close to everything, and if I need something done, if I need to go weld a machine or do whatever, I know where to go, and I have really no intention of moving anywhere else.
After your time with Dirt Bike Magazine, did you go directly and work for Honda after that, or was there something in between the dirt bike gig and working for Honda?
That was the Gunnar Gasser time. So I had a two-year window there, and after 1 year or so, Honda called and said, we understand you're not working for, they didn't know what I was doing. So I said, yeah, I am interested. And so I went down there, I interviewed it. I said, but you know what? I need another 6 months to complete the design of the Gunnar Gasser and start the distribution and get things going. And I guess they were interested enough to give me 6 months. And so I started there on February 1st, 1978.
As the motocross team manager or in another department?
No, I was actually an engineer for the motorcycle side at the time. And we had just introduced, the Honda 250, CR250 that was made in Ohio with a red engine and all. And we had all kinds of issues with chains and suspensions, and the team itself kept losing chains. Imagine that chain derailing at the time was not that uncommon. So I actually got assigned to the team to work on some technical issues with the suspension, with stability and with the chain tension and whatnot. So I worked on that for 6 or 8 months or so. And then starting in 1979, the team manager quit. And they said all of a sudden, they said, oh my gosh, we don't have a team manager. We need somebody. Would you like to take the job? And I said, of course I will. But it was a chaotic time. The guy that left was not available for me to talk to. So I had really no idea what was expected of me. And the team was 6 box vans and 6 riders and 6 mechanics. So quite a few people. And I wish I could redo it now with a little bit of an org chart to see who is in charge of who, and what is the job description here? What are you supposed to do?
Sure.
And somebody would say, I played it by ear, and I really did. And, it came out okay, I guess, in some ways. But it was a difficult time. And, it's one of those 8 days a week type of jobs. You're never home. You're always on airplanes or going somewhere or meeting somebody, including Japan. And it was a very difficult time for the family.
So were you on the road throughout the National Series as well as the Trans Am Series that entire year?
Yeah, exactly. All of the above. So, we started with Supercross. That's when Supercross started actually in November, because the season started with Anaheim in November. And in November '79 is when we introduced, the single shock and the water-cooled Honda, for the first Anaheim race in November of '79. And, of course, we were the first to have, the monoshock, well, other than Yamaha, of course. And, the water cooling, and there was huge controversy at the time, and Kawasaki protested us because water cooling was dangerous, and, hot water could spill out in a crash on competitors. And a big meeting in the trailer, and the resolution of that was that we promised to safety wire the coolant cap to the bike, and that was resolved, that issue. And of course, eventually, everybody went the same way, and it's not an issue anymore, but it was fun at the time. Or maybe not so fun, but a little bit, interesting.
Yeah. So how many years did you spend in the motocross division? Because I know you went on to do a lot with the cars also, but how many years were you involved with the motocross team?
3 years. So 3 years. First as an engineer, and then 2 years as a manager. And then at the time, I figured, motocross and whatnot is I've done all my life. That's all I know. And I really need to move on. And I thought at the time Honda was starting with the automobile side, and we had the Civic for a while, but the Accord was brand new. Certainly the four-door Accord was the first four-door Accord I saw, was I think in '81. And I was intrigued by that, and I applied, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you. And, I stayed with the automotive division for years and years, and as an engineer, and did a lot of interesting stuff. Any company that grows, it's interesting to work for. I mean, it's full speed ahead. Nobody ever holds you back. You can do pretty much whatever you want to do that helps the product or the market along. And it's just a matter of who do we hire next. And it was just a very challenging and rewarding time to work for Honda. Then, many, many years there.
Gunnar, we hear so much about electric cars today, but from what I understand, you were involved with some electric car projects way back then.
Oh, yeah. It turned out, even though I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer, but
right.
There was so much work that needed to be done on the electrical side. And when Honda started, with the cars, there were a lot of motorcycle people working on the project, obviously. And some of the wiring they did, and some of the connectors and whatnot, were motorcycle related and not quite suitable for cars. So we did a lot of troubleshooting on electrical systems on the cars that came. And you can not even imagine what would happen when the car is cross-wired or some wires are cut and this and that. And dealers would call in and say, I have this car, and when I open the left rear door, the headlights come on. I mean, most amazing things could happen when wiring is screwed up on a car. So eventually what we did, we actually ordered up wiring harnesses from the parts department and put them on pegboard. And we had a complete 82 Accord, I think was our first model. We had a complete 82 Accord on pegboard as far as wiring is concerned. And dealers would call in and we would help them out. And eventually we realized that the service manual that came, to the dealers wasn't all that helpful. That was kind of general in states, and it was sort of not very useful at times. That you couldn't find where the ground locations were, because somebody in Japan didn't think the ground locations was all that important. So we actually built the harness on the pegboard. Eventually, we put it on paper. And I remember we had a big, huge drawing with our own wiring on it, and it was called the 82 Accord, the way the car really is. which was different from what the service manual had, and we gained some fame from that, within Honda, and eventually, we started a whole new division that actually publishes a wiring schematic in the form of a book called the Electrical Troubleshooting Manual, and that was one of my first projects for the automobile division. So, lots of work there, and lots of intrigue, and lots of difficulty understanding how electricity flows one way or the other, for sure.
Now, you retired from Honda, but there is another Lindstrom at Honda. I recognize the name there. Your son has been there for a while now, too.
Yeah, he 20 years ago, I think it is. He came to me, and he was sort of interested in riding, and he was a little bit of a motor boy at the time, and he said, you know what, I wonder if I could buy some old practice bikes or something from Honda. So I went to the team, and at the time I worked with automobiles. So I went back to the team. I said, do you have a bunch of old parts and things you sell off practice bikes? And they said, no, we don't, but we have lots of parts, and we have piles of parts. Here's frames over here, here's engines over here, here's this and that. And they said, we, at the most we can do, helping you out, would be to send a kid down here. He can put a bike together by himself, and then we'll sell it to him. So he did, and he put a bike together, and I guess they were impressed enough to say, you know what, when you're done with this thing, can you do another? So he ended up putting together several practice bikes so that he could sell it off, because obviously, the race team has a budget, and they need some income instead of having a bunch of parts being trashed or thrown out. So he did that, and eventually they said, you know what, you could come back and help us sweep the floor and do this and that. So that's how he started, and eventually he became a practice bike mechanic, and a test mechanic. And eventually he drove one of the test trucks, and he went testing during the week, and eventually it snowballed into that. He worked for McGrath, he works for Kevin Windham, and he was part of the team with some of the other riders that, all of them there got to know him pretty well. So eventually he worked himself up there and became an engine assembly guy. He was an engine guy for a year. And then he worked with suspension parts, and so he got to know everything. And then he worked with the team well. And then when Kehoe left, apparently he was next in line, and so he applied for the job. It was not automatic in any way. He applied for the job and was interviewed, and it was quite a formal process. I was impressed. The team management people did really good in interviewing people and getting the one that they found had the most qualification to him, and he got the job. So he's now their new manager, and hopefully they have an org chart and a little bit of a budget that they can follow, and I know they do. So they're well organized, as opposed to my chaotic time there.
How many children do you have, Gunnar, and what about grandchildren?
I have four children and 5 grandchildren, and two grandchildren live in Sweden. 2 of them live up in Missoula, Montana, and one of them lives here in Thousand Oaks. So
okay. When was the last time you were actually in Sweden? Do you get to go back to the old country?
Yeah, I was there in July, and we spent some time visiting friends and whatnot. But it's another one of those, when you're there, you're expected to do and visit and go. And I have friends, I have relatives, I have people that worked at the factory, and I have old racing buddies, including Torsten and others. So The reason we actually scheduled it at that time was that the passing of my friend Pelle Lamas, Mikola's mechanic,
yes,
formerly was Per Olaf Persson, and he had passed away, and I felt strongly for him. He was such a great guy, and I wanted to be there, for his funeral, and so that's why we scheduled it there, and it was a good time. Yeah.
Well, Torsten,
as far as you can have a good time at a funeral, but all the people there and all the others, so yeah, so very, very memorable. Yep.
I was going to say that in a few weeks you will be reunited with some of your old friends from the old country and that part of the world, Torsten Holman and Heikki Mikkola. But right now we're going to go to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the International Motocross Museum and that event that's coming up there. We'll be right back with more from Gunnar Lindstrom. All right, a little commercial put together by Terry Good and everyone at the International Motocross Museum. If you're still interested in attending their fundraiser event on September 21st, go to the internationalmotocrossmuseum.org. Get your tickets now. It's not something that's going to happen again. Last year was absolutely phenomenal. You get to see 50 of the rarest bikes in the world. And at this point, you'll have an opportunity to be with Garrett Walsink, Heikki Mikkola, I believe Roger DeCosta, Bob Hanna, Ricky Johnson, of course, Gunnar Lindstrom, and so many more. I understand 3 generations of Everetts will be there. Harry Everetts, Stefan Everetts, 10-time world champion, and the new protege, Liam Everetts, will be there. It's not something that you want to miss. Get your tickets now. Now, you've been retired, Gunnar, and now you're involved in the International Motocross Museum. How did you and Terry Good come to terms on that, and what exactly do you do there? Tell us more about the event. I know about it, but maybe many of the viewers or listeners don't know about it. Tell us about how you got involved with the International Motocross Museum and some things we can expect to see in about 3 weeks.
Well, Dave Arnold is the one I got to know when I worked with the Honda team. He was one of the mechanics there. Eventually was a very successful team manager. And we've known each other since. He lives not far from here. So we get together every so often. And he called me and he said, I could use some help, with this, because between Roger DeCosta, Dave Arnold, and Terry Good, they were working on putting this event together. So I got involved and I wrote a lot of the bios for that magazine that was actually the program for the event. Turned out not so big. It's actually the size of a magazine. And still available, by the way. So I wrote most of the bios for that. And then, of course, when the event started to come up, then we needed somebody to coordinate all the stuff. And so I wrote, a lot of these, schematics as to who does what and when does this happen. And, I'm kind of an organizer in a way, so I did all that. And we had, these documents written up every other week or so, and I think we ended up with version 14 at the end before we, were ready for the event. So I was the organizer, and I'm pretty good at delegating now. I wasn't before, but I am now. And I'm sort of the Terry's event organizer for the event last year and this year.
Well, a lot goes into it, Gunnar, and maybe you could just take a moment to explain to the listeners and the viewers about the audio part of it, the video part of it, the lighting, the venue itself. There's a lot of planning and a big investment on Terry's part to get this event off the ground. Tell us a little bit more about those things, too.
Well, there was so much to do and think of, and of course, most of it you can't do yourself. We had to have a stage. We had to have curtains that blanked out some of the windows because cars were driving by on the outside. All these little details came in. And then, of course, we had a luncheon, that preceded the whole thing with the VIPs and the champions there. So, and then, of course, the bikes that would come in, and they had to be transported. And Terry and a friend of mine, Mike Schultz, who was responsible for transporting the bikes, the day before they're picking up these box vans, they were canceled, so there were no box vans. They had not been returned from the previous rent or lease. So we had to scramble now for finding another. That kind of stuff is what happens, when you have live events. And eventually we got it to work quite well. And wherever small little errors we made note of those, and we are trying to avoid those errors this year. So hopefully even smoother and even more exciting. So the problem we're having right now is we have so many champions that there's not room for all of them time-wise on the stage for the evening program. So we have, what we call a matinee, and some of these champions will be interviewed in the afternoon. So the program starts at 2 o'clock. And it goes all the way almost to midnight, 11 p.m. And then, of course, people hang around a bit. So we have to come up with a plan to, get everything working and get the bikes in there and the program working for each of our champions to be given their due respect and time, to be recognized in front of all the people there. So right now we're struggling with too many champions, and how are we going to get them all in the program? Which is you've got Heikki Mikkola, Harry Everts, Garrett Walsink, Torsten Holman,
and a few others. The announcers, you have some very, very seasoned professionals there with Ricky Johnson and Jason Wygant. So I'm sure they're going to keep things moving along. Ricky did an absolutely phenomenal job last year, and I would expect he'd do just as great a job this year. And to be able to see all those bikes at one time too, and even after the museum does open, which I want to talk about that in a second too, you may not have the time after the museum opens maybe to get that close again or to ask. I mean, let's look at it this way. You've got Heikki Mikkola there, and you've got his World Championship Yamaha. Where are you going to get an opportunity to actually ask Heikki questions about that bike, or Harry Everett's about his twin carb coupe? That's why I encourage everyone, if you're even thinking about going to this event, now's the time. Get a ticket, because it's going to be next to impossible to ever get these guys together again, probably in America, and to be in such a casual atmosphere to ask them questions about the bikes and about their careers. One more thing, Gunnar, I wanted to talk to you about, and I know it's been Terry's vision, and you've talked about it too. This is not just a place where motorcycles will be on display. We're talking about a 100,000 square foot building, which I understand I will be getting a tour of along with you and several other people when we are out there for the event later in September. But what is this building actually going to be about? It's not just about motorcycles, it's about the history of the sport. Tell us about some of the displays that we might see and how it's all going to be laid out.
Well, I'm not privy to many of the details yet, because we have to call in people that have done museums before, and I'm certainly not one of them,
Okay.
But there will be displays around, each rider. For example, a Roger DeCoster's entire bike collection is there, and of course trophies, his riding gear, helmets, and whatnot. So, and as with any museum, they keep changing. You keep rotating things. You don't stay stagnant for a long time at a museum. So, we have Wolsink's bikes. We have, of course, as I said, Harry Everett's. We have Torsten's bikes and a lot of his stuff there, riding gear and trophies and other things. And one of the most interesting things we have is, the beginning of the monoshock with Yamaha. I don't know how many of you have seen that frame that, Tilkens did, which was a CZ frame that he changed to become a monoshock, and everybody rode it, and of course Suzuki didn't buy it. CZ probably would have been first, but they were still at the time, in a communist country behind the Iron Curtain. So Suzuki got the first shot, and they didn't take it, and Yamaha eventually ended up. This whole story will be told by people that were actually there and actually did ride these bikes and evaluate them, primarily Torsten Hallman. And the story is just fascinating, how this came about and how Yamaha ended up with this bike that Torsten liked in a way, but Håkan Andersson, who was the rider at the time, 73, didn't really care for it that much. He thought it was kind of an odd thing, and an odd bike, and they kept that thing hidden. And then finally at one race, he was struggling with his twin shock bike, and they said, Håkan, shouldn't you try that monoshock thing? And he goes, okay, then I'll try it. They wheeled it out of the van, and the rest is history. I mean, the pictures taken and the pictures cabled around the world, the bike without shocks in the back, and we're all flabbergasted thinking. And the funny story is here that the bike was really good, and for a year, maybe more, we actually didn't know why it was so good. Everybody thought it was because the shock absorber was under the tank, when in reality, and Roger and I talk about this every so often when we see the bike, it was the travel. It had so much more travel in the back, and also the stability of the rear swing arm, because it was cross braced, with this thing to hold the shock in place. That was a real trick, and I think the Mako people figured out part of that pretty quickly when they did the moving up the shocks. But this whole story will be told by people that were actually there. I was not. And people that you can ask questions about. And you can see that first frame that Mr. Tilkens built, it's there. And you can take a look and see how crude it was. It was a proof of concept thing. Yeah. And it's not pretty in any way, but it worked. and it got Yamaha on the motocross map when they tried it in '73. Amazing story.
Gunnar, you're a successful racer, you're a successful engineer, you're in the AMA Hall of Fame. I would like to let everyone know that you are also a successful author. You wrote a book called Husqvarna Success.
Right. I did.
When did that? Go on.
Well, I had started that thing long time, year 2000, 2001. And we knew that, the history needed to be documented in some way. And I worked with Torsten, and that's really where my first project together with Torsten was about the book. And he was going to do the version out of Europe, and I was going to do the part of that came here from America. And we were combining the book eventually and publishing it as one book. But Torsten got involved in business, and he had so many things going on. And at some point we were talking, and he said, Gunnar, I can't do this. You have to take over the whole thing. And I did. And then in 2008, when I retired, I put this as my first project. So I spent 2 years, literally day and night, working on this thing, traveling, interviewing people. I went to Italy to meet Husqvarna people there, because Husqvarna at the time was in Italy. And we wrote the book, and it came out in 2010 in July at the AMA Vintage Days in Ohio. This is where the book was introduced. And we printed a little bit over 3,000 copies. And they sold out within a couple of years, so they're hard to come by, and probably a good sign, actually. Much better than sitting on a pallet of books in your garage and trying to sell. So we're good and happy about that.
There really is no place that anyone could go out and get that book right now. You'd have to find it, I guess, on eBay or something like that. There's no place to buy one.
Yeah, that's right. You have to Google it on eBay, and I've done a few times just out of curiosity, and sometimes people ask some pretty good money for that thing. So yeah, I guess it had value, and we were happy to have it. Torsten and I always wanted to document the history and put a few things on paper that people had misunderstood along the way. And Torsten also wanted it as a reference document to say, what year did that? Who won what year? What did the bike look like in certain year, 74, 75, whatever. And so it's a reference guide, and it has quite a bit of information in the back, and sales statistics, that kind of stuff. So we're pretty happy with it, and Torsten, I think, has also given me compliments for it, and it turned out pretty good. Happy about it.
While I'm thinking about it, tonight's random share giveaway winner is Mike Lagaza. Mike Lagaza, you are tonight's random share giveaway winner. Get a hold of us. Get us your mailing address. We will get you a sticker sheet like this. Compliments of Vinco. Keep the ride going. Gunnar, we're just about ready to wrap it up, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to thank anyone or plug any projects you might be working on. So is there anyone you would like to thank or talk about, or tell anybody anything special? Maybe you want to tell Mrs. Lindstrom that you love her, whatever you want to do.
I do love her, yes, and she just helped me along the way. There she is. And you know what? Through the years, you meet so many nice people, and some of my mentors that had helped me, to get going, and when somebody you can go to and ask questions. Mm-hmm. My first mentor at Husqvarna, his name was Bengt Olof Gustafsson, and I meet him every year when we're in Sweden. Jay and Robert became a mentor, in the English language, and we had many funny stories about that. And eventually, of course, at Honda, the guy that hired me, Chet Hale, somebody that I had good contact with, and Mike Nitz eventually became my mentor when I moved to the automobile side. So a lot of good people I met along the way. Not many people that I didn't care for. They were all good people, and it's such a good industry to have been in. So I'm pretty happy about the way I took.
Did you meet Steve McQueen along the way?
Never did personally. No, we were in the same race once, and he was actually at Indian Dunes when we were there testing, and he rode. But no, so I did not. But he was close to Husqvarna, and Olaf Larsen and others, met him several times. He was actually a pretty funny guy, they said. But
yeah, my friend Pete Hansen wanted to know, and I told him I would ask you if you ever did. So Gunnar, We will be together on September 21st for the International Motocross Museum fundraiser. I will be there a day or two before, and I know we've got a hectic schedule between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Yep, you do.
So I want to thank you for being my guest tonight and telling us about your career and how it has spanned from Sweden and Husqvarna over to Honda and sharing some of those great stories.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Joe.
Gunnar Lindstrom, thank you once again, and I'll talk to you on Friday in our weekly meeting, I'm sure.
Will do, and I'll have a long list of things to do for everybody. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Goodbye, Joe.
Thank you, Gunnar. My guest tonight has been Gunnar Lindstrom. I am Joe Abadi. Thank you so much for watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. You will be able to catch this at any time on Facebook and on YouTube. I do want to thank our sponsors, Motion Pro, Full Circle Racing, Preston Petty Products, Vintco, Northwest Mako CZ, Sunrise Vapor Blasting, I think I said Racer X, and of course, the International Motocross Museum. If you still want to go, it's a great time to get a ticket. You've heard about all the guests that are going to be there, including the bikes. It is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be in the same room with some of the greatest motocross legends that have ever lived. I'm Joe Abadi. Thanks for watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. We'll see you next time. Chino! There's the Gino monster. Show me a big teeth, Gino, how vicious you are.
Oh, vicious. That's what he actually was doing.